What if I told you that the most powerful people you've ever encountered never once raised that to prove a point? Think about the last time someone tried to convince you they were right by speaking louder, faster, more desperately. Did their volume make their words more true? Did their explanations make them more believable? Or did something inside you recognize the weakness hidden beneath all that noise? You see, there exists a fundamental truth that cuts against everything modern society teaches you about strength and influence. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. The one who explains the most is seldom the most understood. The one who complains the longest is never the one who changes their circumstances. True power operates in complete opposition to what most people believe power to be. Most people believe power means having the last word. You can choose to understand that power means knowing when words are unnecessary. Most people believe strength comes from defending every action, every choice, every moment of your existence. You can choose to recognize that real strength comes from actions so aligned with your truths that they require no defense. Most people live as prisoners of their own explanations, trapped in an endless cycle of justifying who they are, what they do, why they think the way they think. You have the opportunity to step into something far more profound. Silence is not empty. Silence is full, full of presence, full of power, full of choice. When you stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided not to understand you, something magnificent happens. You reclaim the energy you've been hemorrhaging through words that fall on deaf ears. You redirect that force back into your own center, your own purpose, your own unshakable foundation. But here's where most people stumble. They confuse silence with weakness. They mistake non-reaction with lack of care. They interpret your refusal to argue as agreement with their position. This confusion reveals their own spiritual poverty, their own desperate need for external validation. A mountain does not explain itself to the wind. A mountain simply stands. The wind may howl, may push, may try to move what cannot be moved. But the mountain remains, unmoved, unshaken, complete in its own existence. You are that mountain. Yet look around you. Watch how people move through their days. They explain their choices to strangers. They justify their decisions to people who have no stake in their outcomes. They seek permission from those who have no authority over their lives. They complain about circumstances they have the power to change, but lack the will to transform. This is the great tragedy of human potential. Not that people lack the capacity for greatness, but that they waste their capacity explaining why they don't have it. Your mother doesn't need to know why you chose one path over another if you are walking it with integrity. Your colleagues don't need detailed justifications for decisions that improve your life. Your friends don't require explanations for boundaries that protect your peace. The people who love you will trust your judgment. The people who don't trust your judgment don't truly love you. This distinction changes everything. When you understand this, you begin to see the world differently. You notice how much energy people spend trying to make others comfortable with their choices. You observe how quickly confidence crumbles under the weight of constant justification. You witness how explanation addiction keeps people small, keeps them seeking approval instead of creating impact. But there's something deeper here, something that goes beyond social dynamics and personal boundaries. There's a spiritual principle at work, an ancient understanding that has been preserved in mountains and monasteries, in warriors and wise ones who understood that true power flows from an entirely different source. The source is not outside you. The source is not in other people's opinions, not in their approval, not in their understanding. The source is in the unshakable knowing that exists within your own being when you are completely aligned with truth. Think of water. Water never argues with the rock about which way to flow. Water never explains to the riverbank why it must move toward the ocean. Water simply follows its nature, and in following its nature it carves canyons, shapes landscapes, creates life itself. Water is soft yet persistent, gentle yet unstoppable, silent yet powerful beyond measure. This is your template. This is your guide. When you align with your true nature, when you move from your center rather than from your need to be understood, you become like water. You become soft enough to flow around obstacles, persistent enough to overcome them, powerful enough to reshape the landscape of your entire existence. But most people never reach this alignment because they're too busy explaining themselves to an audience that isn't listening. Have you ever noticed that the people who demand the most explanations from you are usually the ones least willing to change their minds? Have you observed that those who insist you justify your choices are often the most rigid in their own thinking? Have you seen how the loudest critics of your silence are typically the most uncomfortable with their own inner quietude? This is not coincidence. This is projection. People who have not learned to be comfortable with their own thoughts demand constant external stimulation. People who have not made peace with their own choices need everyone else's choices to make sense within their limited framework. People who have not developed inner authority seek to undermine the authority of others. Your silence threatens them not because it's wrong but because it's right. Your lack of explanation disturbs them not because it's rude but because it's powerful. Your refusal to justify yourself unsettles them not because it's unkind but because it's unshakable. And this brings us to the heart of the paradox. The moment you stop trying to prove your power, you become powerful. The instant you cease explaining your worth, you become worthy. The second you quit defending your choices become unassailable. This isn't about becoming cold or disconnected. This isn't about building walls or shutting people out. This is about recognizing that your energy is sacred, your attention is precious, and your inner peace is not negotiable. When you speak, speak from fullness, not from emptiness. When you act, act from choice, not from compulsion. When you engage, engage from strength, not from need. But here's what happens in that space between stimulus and response, in that sacred, where most people react automatically. Here's where transformation lives. Here's where you either remain a prisoner of other people's expectations or step into the freedom of your own authentic power. Most people never find this space because they're too busy filling it with words, with explanations, with justifications that steal their thunder before it can even rumble. You have a choice right now. In this moment, as you hear these words, you can choose to continue the pattern of over-explanation, of seeking external validation for internal decisions. Or you can choose something else entirely. You can choose to trust your own judgment. You can choose to honor your own. You can choose to let your actions speak louder than your explanations ever could. But choosing this path requires something that most people find terrifying. It requires you to be comfortable with being misunderstood. It requires you to be at peace with other people's disapproval. It requires you to value your own inner knowing more than their outer opinions. This is the warrior's path. Not the path of aggression or domination, but the path of inner mastery and unshakable presence. Think of the ancient warriors who moved through battlefields with complete calm. They didn't explain their strategies to their enemies. They didn't justify their presence to those who opposed them. They simply moved with precision, acted with purpose, struck with the force of accumulated silence. Their power came not from their words, but from their willingness to act without needing approval for the action. You carry this same warrior spirit within you. You have this same capacity for unshakable presence. You possess this same ability to move through your life with purpose rather than explanation, with action rather than justification, with presence rather than performance. But accessing this power requires you to do something that goes against every social conditioning you've received. It requires you to stop caring whether people understand your choices and start caring whether your choices align with your truth. When you make this shift, when you move from external validation to internal alignment, everything changes. Your relationships change because you stop attracting people who need you to be small and start drawing those who appreciate your strength. Your work changes because you stop seeking permission for your brilliance and start expressing it naturally. Your entire experience of life changes because you stop living in reaction to other people's opinions and start living in response to your own deepest wisdom. This is not a theoretical concept. This is not philosophy for philosophy's sake. This is practical wisdom that you can apply immediately in the next conversation you have, in the next decision you make, in the next moment when someone demands that you justify your existence. You can choose silence, you can choose presence, you can choose power. But power, real power, requires practice. It requires the discipline to catch yourself before you over-explain. It requires the awareness to notice when you're seeking approval instead of following truth. It requires the courage to let people misunderstand you rather than exhaust yourself trying to make them comfortable with who you are. Most people will never develop this discipline because it feels too risky. They believe that if they stop explaining themselves, people will reject them. They fear that if they stop seeking approval, they'll lose love. They worry that if they stop justifying their choices will be wrong. But here's what actually happens when you embrace the power of silence, when you own your choices without explanation, when you move through your life with unshakable presence. People respect you more, not less. They trust your judgment more deeply because they see you trust it yourself. They value your words more highly because you don't waste them on unnecessary explanations. They appreciate your company more because you're not constantly seeking their approval. The people who are meant to be in your life will love you more fully when you stop performing for their acceptance. The people who are not meant to be in your life will remove themselves when you stop contorting yourself to keep them comfortable. This is the natural selection of relationships, the organic filtering that happens when you align with authentic power rather than performed weakness. But beyond the social benefits, beyond the relational improvements, beyond the external changes that come from internal alignment, there's something far more profound waiting for you. There's the deep peace that comes from knowing you don't owe anyone an explanation for being who you are. There's the unshakable confidence that emerges when you stop seeking external validation for internal wisdom. There's the quiet joy that fills the space previously occupied by anxiety about other people's opinions. This peace, this confidence, this joy, they're not dependent on circumstances. They're not conditional on other people's approval. They're not temporary states that come and go based on external feedback. They're permanent qualities of being that emerge when you align with the truth of who you are, rather than the fiction of who you think you should be. And this brings us to the edge of something transformative, something that will require not just understanding but practice, not just agreement but application, not just inspiration but implementation. Because knowing about the power of silence is not the same as living from that power. Understanding the weakness of over-explanation is not the same as choosing strength in your daily interactions. Recognizing the peace that comes from inner alignment is not the same as cultivating that alignment moment by moment, choice by choice, breath by breath. What you're about to learn will give you the specific practices, the concrete tools, the precise methods for transforming this understanding into lived experience. You're about to learn how to move from knowing about authentic power to embodying it so completely that silence becomes your natural state, presence becomes your default mode, and unshakable confidence becomes the foundation from which you engage with every aspect of your existence. The foundation of unshakable power rests upon three pillars, not theories, not concepts, not ideas that sound good but remain untested. Three practices so fundamental that mastering them transforms not just how you interact with the world but how the world responds to you. Right now, as you sit here, your breath is either working for you or against you. Your attention is either focused or scattered. Your body is either aligned with your intentions or fighting them. Most people never notice these basic elements of their existence, yet these elements determine everything about their experience of power. Can you feel your breath right now? Not thinking about it, but actually feeling the air as it moves through your nostrils, fills your lungs, expands your ribcage. Most people breathe as if their life depends on it, which it does, but they never breathe as if their power depends on it, which it also does. Your breath is your first tool of transformation. Your breath is your immediate access to presence. Your breath is the bridge between unconscious reaction and conscious response. When someone challenges you, what happens to your breathing? When someone demands an explanation you don't want to give, how does your breath change? When someone pushes your boundaries, where does your breath go? Most people's breath becomes shallow, rapid, confined to the upper chest. This is the breath of reaction, the breath of defensiveness, the breath of powerlessness. This breath signals to your entire nervous system that you are under threat, that you must fight or flee, that you have lost control of the situation. But what if you could train your breath to remain steady, regardless of external pressure? What if you could maintain the deep, slow rhythm of power, even when others are trying to pull you into their chaos? This is not about breathing techniques you practice for 10 minutes in the morning and forget for the rest of the day. This is about conscious breathing as a way of life, as a foundation of presence, as your primary tool for maintaining center when everything around you is trying to knock you off balance. When you breathe from your center, from that space 3 fingers below your navel, you breathe from your power. When you breathe into your belly instead of your chest, you breathe into stability instead of anxiety. When you extend your exhale longer than your inhale, you breathe into calm instead of reactivity. Watch a master craftsman at work. Watch a skilled surgeon in the operating room. Watch an accomplished musician in performance. Notice their breathing. Notice how steady it remains regardless of the complexity of their task, regardless of the pressure they face, regardless of the stakes involved. Their breath is their anchor. Their breath is their power source. Their breath is what allows them to remain present to what they're doing instead of lost in worry about the outcome. You can develop this same quality of breathing. You can train your breath to be your ally in every situation where someone expects you to lose your center, to over-explain, to justify your choices. But breathing from your center is only the foundation. The second pillar requires something that most people find even more challenging. It requires you to observe without immediately reacting, to witness without instantly responding, to see clearly without being swept away by what you see. Most people live in a state of constant reaction. Something happens, they respond immediately. Someone speaks, they answer instantly. Someone acts, they react without thinking. This reactive pattern keeps them powerless because they never create space between what happens to them and how they respond to what happens. But you can choose differently. You can choose to create a gap, a moment of conscious awareness between stimulus and response. In this gap lives all your power. In this exists every possibility for transformation. In this moment of awareness lies your freedom from automatic patterns that keep you small. Think of a cat watching a mouse. The cat doesn't react to every movement the mouse makes. The cat observes. The cat waits. The cat remains perfectly still while gathering information, assessing the situation, choosing the precise moment to act. When the cat finally moves, it moves with complete commitment, total precision, unstoppable force. This is observation without reaction. This is the power of witnessing without being swept away by what you witness. When someone demands that you explain yourself, can you observe their demand without immediately feeling compelled to respond? When someone challenges your choices, can you witness their challenge without automatically defending? When someone tries to pull you into an argument, can you see their attempt without taking the bait? This capacity for observation without reaction is not natural for most people. Most people are trained to respond immediately, to fill every silence, to meet every question with an answer, every challenge with a defense, every criticism with a justification. But you can retrain yourself. You can develop the ability to witness what's happening without being controlled by what's happening. You can learn to observe other people's emotions without absorbing them, to see their reactions without matching them, to hear their demands without automatically complying. This retraining happens breath by breath, moment by moment, choice by choice. The next time someone asks you a question that feels like a trap, breathe first. Feel your feet on the ground. Notice your breath moving in and out of your body. Observe the question without immediately formulating an answer. See if the question even deserves a response. The next time someone challenges your decision, breathe first. Feel your connection to your center. Notice what's happening in your body. Observe their challenge without immediately defending. See if their challenge has any validity or if it's simply their discomfort with your choices. The next time someone demands that you justify your actions, breathe first. Feel your own solid presence. Notice the demand without feeling obligated to meet it. Observe whether this person has earned the right to an explanation or if they're simply trying to control you through questioning. This practice of observation without reaction creates something profound. It creates choice where there was once only compulsion. It creates freedom where there was once only automatic response. It creates power where there was once only reactive weakness. But observation without reaction is still not complete mastery. The third pillar requires you to understand something about silence that most people never realize. Silence is not the absence of communication. Silence is the most powerful form of communication available to you. When you remain silent in the face of demands for explanation, you communicate strength. When you say nothing in response to criticism that doesn't serve you, you communicate self-respect. When you offer no words to fill uncomfortable silence, you communicate confidence in your own presence. But most people are terrified of silence. They fill every with words, they explain things that need no explanation. They justify choices that require no justification. They speak when silence would be more powerful, more elegant, more true. Silence makes people uncomfortable because silence forces them to confront their own inner noise. When you remain silent, they must sit with their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own discomfort. Most people cannot tolerate this, so they will say almost anything to get you to break your silence. But your silence is not cruelty. Your silence is not punishment. Your silence is simply your refusal to fill space that doesn't belong to you. When someone asks you a question that comes from nosiness rather than genuine care, silence is appropriate. When someone demands that you explain choices that don't affect them, silence is powerful. When someone tries to engage you in drama that serves no one, silence is wise. This doesn't mean you become a silent person who never speaks. This means you become a person who speaks intentionally, who uses words as tools rather than as compulsions, who understands that sometimes the most profound thing you can say is nothing at all. Think of the most powerful people you've ever encountered. Not the loudest people, not the most talkative people, but the most genuinely powerful people. How did they use silence? How comfortable were they with silence conversation? How much did they speak versus how much they listened? Truly powerful people understand that their presence speaks louder than their words. They know that their actions carry more weight than their explanations. They recognize that their silence often communicates more clearly than their speech. You can develop this same relationship with silence. You can learn to be comfortable with silence. You can train yourself to speak only when you have something valuable to add rather than speaking to fill empty space. But here's where these three pillars work together to create something greater than the sum of their parts. When you breathe from your center, you remain grounded regardless of external pressure. When you observe without reacting, you maintain choice in every situation. When you use silence strategically, you communicate from strength rather than weakness. These three practices create a foundation of presence so solid that nothing can shake it. They create a quality of being so centered that others naturally respect it. They create a form of power so authentic that it requires no explanation, no justification, no defense. But developing these capacities requires practice in real situations, not just understanding in quiet moments. The next time you're in a meeting and someone challenges your idea, breathe first, observe their challenge without immediately defending, and see if silence creates more space for your idea to be heard than explanation would. The next time someone in your family questions your choices, breathe into your center, witness their questioning without taking it personally, and respond with presence rather than justification. The next time a stranger feels entitled to your explanation, breathe deeply, observe their entitlement without feeling obligated to meet it, and let your silence communicate your boundaries more clearly than words could. Each time you practice these three pillars together, you strengthen your capacity for authentic power. Each time you choose conscious breathing over reactive breathing, observation over immediate reaction, strategic silence over compulsive explanation, you build the unshakable foundation that allows you to move through your life with grace, strength, and undeniable presence. Most people spend their entire lives reacting to circumstances, explaining their choices, justifying their existence. But you have the opportunity to choose something entirely different. You have the capacity to develop the three pillars of authentic power and use them to transform not just your own experience, but your impact on everyone around you. When you master these pillars, something shifts in how people relate to you. They stop demanding explanations because your presence explains everything they need to know. Stop challenging your choices because your certainty makes challenge feel unnecessary. They stop trying to control you because your centeredness makes control impossible. This is not about becoming cold or distant. This is not about building walls or shutting people out. This is about becoming so solid in your own foundation that you can engage with others from strength rather than neediness, from choice rather than compulsion, from love rather than fear. The three pillars create the foundation. What you build on that foundation will determine how powerfully you live, how authentically you love, and how completely you fulfill your deepest purpose. But here's what happens when someone discovers these principles for the first time. They practice conscious breathing for a week and expect their entire life to transform. They try observation without reaction once and wonder why they still feel triggered. They attempt strategic silence in one conversation and feel disappointed when it doesn't immediately change their relationships. Real transformation doesn't happen in moments of inspiration. Real transformation happens in the mundane moments when no one is watching, when the pressure is on, when your old patterns are screaming at you to return to familiar territory. Your colleague walks into your office tomorrow morning and questions the decision you made last week. What do? Your breath becomes shallow. Your mind immediately starts formulating justifications. Your mouth opens to explain what needs no explanation. Stop right there. In that instant between their question and your automatic response lies everything you've been learning. In that split second between stimulus and reaction exists your power to choose differently. Feel your feet on the floor. Feel your breath moving into your belly. Feel your spine straight and strong. Now observe their question without absorbing their energy. See their discomfort without making it your emergency. Witness their need for explanation without feeling obligated to provide it. What if you simply looked at them with calm presence and said nothing? What if you let their question hang in the air until they realized it wasn't actually a question, but a judgment disguised as inquiry? What if you trusted your original decision enough to let it stand without defense? This is where theory becomes practice. This is where understanding becomes mastery. This is where you either step into your authentic power or slide back into old patterns of explanation and justification. Your family gathers for dinner next weekend. Someone inevitably comments on your life choices, your career path, your relationship status, your financial decisions. They frame it as concern, but you feel the judgment underneath. Your old self would explain, would justify, would seek their approval for choices that are yours alone to make. But you have tools now. You have the three pillars supporting your response. Breathe into your center while they speak. Observe their comment without immediately formulating a defense. Let silence create space between their opinion and your reaction. Maybe you smile and change the subject. Maybe you acknowledge their concern without accepting their judgment. Maybe you simply say, "I appreciate your care," and let that be enough. Your lack of defensiveness will speak louder than any explanation ever could. Notice what happens inside you when you make this choice. Notice how much energy you retain when you don't pour it into convincing people who have already made up their minds. Notice how centered you remain when you don't allow other people's discomfort to become your crisis. This is the beginning of living differently. This is the start of moving through your world from strength instead of neediness, from choice instead of compulsion, from presence instead of performance. But the path of authentic power requires you to understand something that most people never learn. The people in your life will resist your transformation more than you might expect. Not because they don't love you, but because your growth challenges their comfort zones. Your refusal to over-explain forces them to examine their own need for constant justification. Your centeredness highlights their own internal chaos. Some people will interpret your new boundaries as rejection. Some will see your strategic silence as rudeness. Some will experience your self-possession as arrogance. This resistance is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. This resistance is confirmation that you're doing something powerful. When you stop seeking approval, people who controlled you through approval, withdrawal, lose their influence. When you stop over-explaining, people who manipulated you through confusion lose their power. When you stop reacting to every provocation, people who fed off your emotional energy lose their supply. This natural selection process will show you who truly supports your growth and who was invested in keeping you small. The people who celebrate your new strength were always your allies. The people who resist your boundaries were always energy drains disguised as relationships. Trust this process. Trust the discomfort that comes with change. Trust your growing capacity to remain centered when others try to pull you into their drama. Your boss emails you at 9 o'clock at night demanding an immediate response to something that could wait until morning. Your old pattern would be to respond instantly, to explain why you couldn't respond earlier, to apologize for not being available 24 hours a day. But you choose differently. You see the email. You breathe consciously. You observe the demand without feeling compelled to meet it immediately. You respond the next morning with the information requested and nothing more. No apology for not responding at night. No explanation of your evening activities. No justification for having boundaries around your personal time. Your boss may be surprised by this change, but they will respect it more than they ever respected your immediate availability. People value what they cannot easily access. They respect what they cannot easily control. This principle applies to every relationship in your life. The friend who expects you to always be available for their latest crisis will respect you more when you offer support on your terms rather than theirs. The family member who demands detailed explanations for your choices will trust your judgment more when you stop seeking their approval for decisions that are yours to make. But living this way requires constant vigilance, not because the practices are difficult, but because the old patterns are so deeply ingrained. Your nervous system has been trained for years to react immediately, to explain extensively, to seek approval constantly. Rewiring these patterns takes patience, persistence, and compassion for yourself as you learn new ways of being. Some days you will catch yourself before you over-explain. Some days you will notice yourself seeking approval and choose self-validation instead. Some days you will remember to breathe consciously before reacting to triggering situations. These are victories worth celebrating. Other days you will fall back into old patterns. You will explain when silence would be stronger. You will seek approval when self-trust would be wiser. You will react automatically when conscious response would be more powerful. These are not failures. These are simply data points showing you where you still have room to grow. The path of authentic power is not about perfection. The path of authentic power is about awareness, choice, and gradual transformation of unconscious patterns into conscious responses. Each time you choose breath over reaction, you strengthen your capacity for presence. Each time you choose observation over immediate response, you expand your freedom to act from wisdom rather than impulse. Each time you choose strategic silence over compulsive explanation, you deepen your connection to authentic power. 6 months from now, people will notice something different about you. They won't be able to identify exactly what has changed, but they will sense your increased presence, your quiet confidence, your unshakable centeredness. They will find themselves respecting your opinions more, seeking your advice more often, feeling calmer in your presence. This transformation happens not because you've become a different person, but because you've become more fully yourself. You've aligned with your authentic nature, instead of performing a version of yourself designed to please others. You've chosen presence over performance, authenticity over approval, inner authority over external validation. A year from now, your entire life will reflect this internal shift. Your relationships will be deeper because they're based on truth rather than performance. Your work will be more fulfilling because you're expressing your genuine capabilities rather than seeking approval for your efforts. Your decisions will be clearer because they arise from inner wisdom rather than external pressure. This is not fantasy. This is the natural result of aligning with authentic power rather than perform powerlessness. But the most profound change will be internal. You will move through your days with a quality of peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. You will face challenges with a stability that comes from within rather than from others' approval. You will make choices with a confidence that arises from self-trust rather than from consensus. When someone asks you why you made a particular decision, you will feel no compulsion to justify it. When someone questions your choices, you will feel no need to defend them. When someone demands explanations you don't want to give, you will feel no obligation to provide them. This is not because you've become cold or uncaring. This is because you've learned to distinguish between people who deserve explanations and people who demand them, between relationships that warrant vulnerability and interactions that require boundaries, between love that supports your growth and control that keeps you small. You will speak when you have something valuable to contribute. You will remain silent when silence serves the situation better. You will act from choice rather than compulsion, from strength rather than weakness, from love rather than fear. And in those moments when someone notices your transformation and asks how you changed, how you became so centered, how you developed such unshakable presence, you will smile and remember the paradox that started this entire transformation. True power whispers. Real strength requires no explanation. Authentic presence speaks louder than any words ever could. You will not explain how you changed because your change explains itself. You will not justify your transformation because your results justify everything. You will not defend your new way of being because your peace, your strength, your quiet confidence will be defense enough. The mountain does not explain itself to the wind. The ocean does not justify its depth to the shore. The sun does not defend its right to shine. And you, in your authentic power, will not explain yourself to those who have already decided not to understand. This is your inheritance. This is your birthright. This is the unshakable path that leads not just to personal transformation, but to a way of being that influences everyone you encounter without effort, without explanation, without apology. Never complain. Never explain. Own your power in silence. The path is before you. The choice is yours. The power has always been within you. Now you know how to access it.